lost someone that I interviewed in the past, Phil Harris.
Right.
What did he die? He didn't die on a ship, right, did he?
Yeah. He got a stroke out there.
They faced ice, storms, and the kind of cold that cuts through bone. Millions watched them pull crab from the sea like their lives depended on it, because they did. Deadliest Catch showed us the danger and the chase for survival. But what if the real danger wasn't out at sea? What if the scariest part came after the cameras stopped rolling? The truth is, not every man who set foot on those boats made it back the same. Some never even came back at all. These are the cast members from Deadliest Catch, who are either dead or have had their fair share of run-ins with the law. What was Deadliest Catch all about? Deadliest Catch was one of those shows you didn't plan to watch, until you did. Then suddenly, you were 6 episodes deep, completely hooked on men pulling crab pots out of freezing water somewhere off the coast of Alaska. The show followed crab fishermen working the Bering Sea, chasing king crab and opilio crab in some of the harshest weather on the planet. These jobs weren't comfortable, to say the least, because they worked long shifts in the cold and sometimes terrible storms, with heavy equipment swinging around and zero room for error. Accidents happened often and sometimes worse. The show wasn't scripted or polished, and that's why people connected with it. Everything felt real, including the pain, pressure, danger, money problems, fights, and the rare moments of calm. You'd see a guy limping on a frozen deck while still doing his job because there was no time to complain. If you slowed down, you risked falling behind. And falling behind could cost the whole crew. Each boat had its own vibe. Some were all business, while others had family tension, old rivalries, or crews that barely held it together. The captains became familiar faces that were tough and unpredictable, with some more respected than others, but all trying to finish the season without losing anyone or anything important. Every choice they made carried weight, especially in the middle of a storm. Fans weren't always watching because of the storms or the crab count, but the people. Viewers followed certain crew members for years, saw them rise, fall, come back, or disappear completely. You'd hear about someone missing a season, and then you'd hear a rumor about why. Because behind the fishing, there was always more going on. The stress, isolation, injuries, and the money all added up. And off the boat, some of those problems followed them home. Not everyone made it through clean, and not everyone made it through at all. Phil Harris. If you watched Deadliest Catch during its early seasons, you know exactly who Phil Harris was. He was the captain of the Cornelia Marie, chain-smoking, rough-talking, and full of one-liners that made you laugh even when things were falling apart around him. Phil was one of the most popular figures on the show. In fact, many would argue that he was the heart of it. He was always himself and never acted like a TV personality. He was honest, tough, and a little reckless, but always focused when it counted. You could tell he cared about his crew, and more than anything, he cared about his 2 sons, Josh and Jake. They worked on the boat with him, and while there were a lot of ups and downs, there was no missing the loyalty and love there, even when they didn't always say it out loud. Phil had been fishing for decades before the cameras ever showed up. He knew the job inside and out, and he didn't sugarcoat anything. He pushed through pain, injuries, and constant stress to keep the boat running and the business alive. That kind of pressure adds up, and over time, it started to wear on him. In Season 6, things took a serious turn. While offloading crab in Alaska, Phil suffered a massive stroke. Cameras weren't rolling at that exact moment, but the aftermath played out on the show, which was something fans weren't expecting and didn't take lightly. He was flown to the hospital and went through emergency surgery. For a while, it looked like he might pull through. In fact, there were scenes of him in the hospital talking with Josh, cracking jokes, and even trying to check on the business from his bed. But things quickly changed when complications set in. And on February 9, 2010, Phil passed away at the age of 53. When that episode aired, fans were crushed. It wasn't just sad because someone on TV had died. It felt like we lost someone we knew. The show handled it with respect. You saw the reactions from his sons, the crew, and fellow captains who had competed with him for years. It was heartbreaking, and it was heavy. Phil's death was a major turning point for Deadliest Catch, and even though the show kept going, it became obvious that something was missing after that. His son Josh eventually took over the Cornelia Marie and tried to carry on his dad's legacy, but it was never quite the same without Phil at the helm. He had that rare ability to be both intimidating and endearing at the same time. He was the kind of captain you didn't want to disappoint, but also someone you'd want to have a beer with once the storm passed. Nick McClain. Nick McClain was one of the most recognizable deckhands on Deadliest Catch. He worked on the summer bay and was known for being fast, tough, and sharp. He was always in the thick of it, where you'll usually find him hauling gear, fixing equipment, or helping new guys figure things out. He was also one of the few people who didn't try to act differently for the cameras. So what you saw was definitely what you got. Nick came from a long line of fishermen. His father was part of the old-school Alaskan crab fleet, so Nick grew up around the industry and started working at sea from a young age. Fishing was more than a paycheck for him. It was all he knew, and in a lot of ways it defined everything about him. What most people didn't see early on was how much Nick was struggling off the boat. He battled both alcohol and substance addiction for years, and it got to a point where he was using heavily while still filming. For a while, he held it together and kept showing up, doing the work and cracking jokes. But eventually, it caught up with him. By season 13, things had gone too far, and his behavior changed. He started missing time on the boat. Captain Wild Bill had to make a call, and Nick was let go from the summer bay. Fans saw it happen on the show, and it was just a very sad moment for everyone. But Nick didn't hide after he was let go. He checked himself into treatment and tried to turn things around. After some time away, he came back clean and focused. He even opened up about what he went through and wrote a personal essay that described everything, from his worst moments to the reason he wanted to stay alive. It looked like he had taken a real step forward, and for a while, things seemed better. He was working again, back with the crew, and he looked way healthier. You could tell he wanted to keep going in the right direction. Then, in December 2020, everything tragically ended. Nick was found dead in a hotel room in Nashville. He was just 33, and the cause was substance overdose. The news hit so hard. Viewers who had followed his ups and downs felt it, and so did the crew. Nick had been open about his fight with addiction and had tried to change, and for a while he did. But recovery isn't easy, and sometimes it takes more than one chance. Milan Reyes. Milan Reyes didn't have as much screen time as some of the others, but fans still remembered him. He worked as a deckhand and appeared on Deadliest Catch across a few different boats, including the Seabrook and the Cape Caution. He was the kind of guy who kept his head down, did the hard work, and didn't make a big show of it. On deck, he moved quickly, stayed focused, and handled the grind like someone who had done it for years. Off the boat, Milan was known as a laid-back guy with a close group of friends and a young family. He had kids, a fiancé, and people who genuinely cared about him. Fishing paid the bills, but he was working toward a future that had nothing to do with TV. That's why the news of his death in July 2020 felt so unexpected and crazy. It didn't follow a long public struggle, nor did it play out on camera. In fact, there were no warning signs at all that fans could see. We all just woke up one day, and he was gone. According to reports, Milan suffered a heart attack at home in Whitefish, Montana. He was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support, but he never recovered. His family made the decision to remove him from life support a few days later. He was 38 years old at the time. At first, there were a lot of questions. A heart attack at 38 didn't seem to make sense, especially for someone who was active and used to working in brutal conditions. But later, it was confirmed that hard substances were involved. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as acute substance intoxication. It was a really hard news to hear. The people closest to him said he had been working hard to stay clean and focused on his family. They believed he was doing well, which just made the loss even harder. It wasn't just that he died young, it was that it caught everyone off guard because friends, family, and fans didn't see it coming. His castmates shared tributes online, and fans left messages across social media. Even though he wasn't the loudest or most featured on the show, people remembered his work ethic, his energy, and how he treated the people around him. He left behind children who now grow up without their dad, and a fiancé who thought they had more time. And sadly, Milan's name is just one in a long list of Deadliest Catch crew members whose stories ended far too soon. Lara. Lara wasn't on the show for very long, but his name still meant something to fans of the show, especially those who followed the Cornelia Marie closely. He stepped into the spotlight during one of the show's toughest transitions, which was after the death of Captain Phil Harris. Tony had been a close friend of Phil's and had worked with him behind the scenes for years. They were more than just fishing buddies, but also business partners. When Phil passed away in 2010, there was a question about who would take over the Cornelia Marie. It didn't feel right to just hand the boat off to a stranger. So when Tony came in as captain for Season 7, it made sense. He knew the crew, the boat, and most importantly, he knew the legacy he was stepping into. Compared to some of the other personalities on the show, Tony was calm. He wasn't the kind of captain who yelled every 5 minutes or needed to prove himself. He ran a tight ship, stayed focused on the catch, and didn't create unnecessary drama. This confidence earned him a lot of respect from viewers and the crew. Even though his time on the show was brief, Tony helped steady the Cornelia Marie during a really unstable period. He kept things moving when emotions were still raw, and the future of the boat was uncertain. After that season, he stepped away from filming and went back to working off-camera in the crab industry and helping run the business side of things. That's why his death in 2015 came as such a surprise. Tony died in his sleep during his trip to a motorcycle rally in Sturgis, South Dakota. He was 50 years old, and reports later confirmed the cause of death was a heart attack. It was sudden and completely unexpected. For fans who remembered him as the soothing presence during a difficult season, it didn't feel like someone whose name should end up on a memorial list. But there it was, another seemingly healthy man who was gone in a flash. Jake Harris. Jake Harris was one of the youngest faces on Deadliest Catch. Fans first met him as the son of Captain Phil Harris, working on the Cornelia Marie alongside his brother Josh. At first, he was quiet and reserved, but over time, viewers saw more of his personality. He was fast on deck and clearly trying to prove himself, both as a fisherman and as someone worthy of his father's trust. Being part of a reality show was never really the plan for Jake. He grew up around fishing and knew the industry, but working under his dad, with cameras rolling and the pressure always high, wasn't easy. Still, During those early seasons, people saw potential in him. He had a strong bond with Phil, and even when they clashed, it was clear there was love and respect there. When Phil died in 2010, everything changed. Jake took the loss hard, and anyone could see it. The grief hit both brothers deeply, but Jake seemed to struggle more with how to cope. He started pulling away from the show, and eventually, he disappeared from it altogether. Fans didn't know all the details, but it was obvious something was going on off camera. Over the next few years, things got worse. Jake battled addiction and kept getting into legal trouble. DUIs, substance possession, and a string of arrests started to make headlines. He was no longer the quiet kid from the Cornelia Marie. Now, his name was showing up in court records. In 2019, things reached a breaking point when Jake was arrested after leading police on a high-speed chase in Washington state. When officers caught up with him, they found some hard substances and a stolen handgun in his RV. He was charged with multiple felonies, including substance possession and firearm offenses. He later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. The story didn't end there, though. After his release, Jake continued to struggle. Reports of more trouble with the law followed, and in 2021, he was arrested again, this time for possession and intent to distribute. Each time, the news seemed to confirm what fans feared, that Jake hadn't been able to turn things around. Josh Harris, his brother, has spoken publicly about Jake's situation. He said they've had long stretches without contact, and that addiction has changed his brother in painful ways. But he's also said he still hopes Jake will find a way back, that he still believes there's a version of Jake who can come through this. Jake's story is one of the hardest for longtime fans of the show, not because he messed up, but because people watched him grow up as the loyal son and promising deckhand. And now, instead of being on a boat or making something meaningful out of his life, he's been in and out of jail. Gerald Seist. Gerald Seist may not have been one of the major stars on the show, but his time on the show still left an impression. He worked as a deckhand and appeared briefly during Season 10 aboard the FV Northwestern, which was one of the more interesting boats in the series. Even though his screen time was short, it didn't take long for fans to notice that something seemed off. Jared struggled on deck. Everyone could clearly see that he wasn't as fast or focused as the rest of the crew. Being on those boats is a job that demands full concentration, speed, and strength, and falling behind can be extremely dangerous. Eventually, his time on the Northwestern came to an end when he was let go, and after that he didn't return to the show. At the time, most viewers assumed he simply wasn't cut out for the pace of crab fishing, but not long after his disappearance, his name started popping up in the news, and not for reasons anyone would expect. In the years following his short run on Deadliest Catch, Jared faced multiple arrests, all tied to substance use and theft. According to police reports, he struggled heavily with addiction, and that addiction led to a string of run-ins with the law, including charges for possession and probation violations. But the problems didn't stop there. Gerald was arrested several times in Florida on serious charges. In one case, he was accused of stealing merchandise from a Home Depot store not once, but multiple times. Investigators claimed he was involved in organized retail theft, where he walked out with hundreds of dollars worth of goods and attempted to sell them afterward. He was also charged with grand theft and substance possession after police found some on him during another arrest. By this point, it was clear that Jared's life had gone off track. From the outside, it looked like he'd spiraled into a cycle of addiction, crime, and jail time, and there weren't many signs of recovery. In interviews, he admitted he had lost control. He talked about struggling with addiction and trying to get clean but failing more than once. His arrests piled up, and at one point, he had outstanding warrants in multiple counties and was booked into jail several times over the span of just a few years. As of 2025, Gerald remains in legal trouble, and his name is more associated with mugshots than his brief moment on reality TV. His story didn't play out across multiple seasons or fan-favorite episodes, but it still fits into the larger pattern of Deadliest Catch cast members whose lives off the water were just as turbulent, if not worse, than the storms they faced at sea. And like Gerald, this next cast member found himself heavily dependent on substances and habits that left him on the opposing side of Johnny Law. Elliot Nice. Elliot Nice brought controversy to Deadliest Catch and made the show all the more interesting to watch. He was a young captain running his own boat, the FV Saga, and trying to make his mark in a fleet filled with older, more experienced leaders. At just 28 years old, Elliot took control of the Saga. He had confidence and ambition, which he didn't try to hide at all. From the beginning, he stood out from the rest of the cast. He pushed hard to get a good haul, and he didn't hold back when it came to confronting his crew. But while some fans admired his drive, others saw him as reckless. His management style was intense, and it didn't always go over well with the people working under him. Away from the cameras, Elliot was dealing with more than just the pressure of crab fishing. As the seasons went on, it became clear that he was struggling with substance abuse. He began to clash with other captains and even with his own crew. Tension followed him both on and off the water. By season 11, Elliot had reached a breaking point. He left the show and stepped away from the Saga. Officially, it was framed as a personal decision, but later, Elliot admitted he had checked into rehab. He said he needed to focus on getting clean and fixing his life. And for a while, it looked like he was serious about making a change. He even posted updates on social media about his recovery, showing that he was spending time with family, focusing on his health, and staying away from the chaos. Many were rooting for him to return to the show, but some others did not appreciate that sentiment. Then, everything went quiet, until the legal trouble started. In 2022, Elliot was arrested on multiple charges, including substance possession and firearm violations. According to reports, he was found with a significant amount of substance, along with illegal weapons. It was a serious case, and it wasn't his first run-in with the law. There had been signs before, but this arrest confirmed what many feared, that he hadn't fully escaped the path he was on. He was eventually sentenced to time behind bars, which was a huge fall from where he started. The story stung for fans who had watched him in those early seasons. Elliot had potential, the knowledge, instincts, and the opportunity. But everything he built started to slip once addiction and poor decisions took hold. To this day, there are still fans who bring up his name, wondering if he'll ever come back, or if he even wants to. But at this point, a return to the Bering Sea seems unlikely. Blake Painter. Blake Painter may not have had the longest run on the show, but he made enough of an impression for fans to remember his name. He served as captain of the FV Maverick and appeared during the early seasons of the show. He was young and skilled, which made everyone see him as someone who was built for the job and ready for the spotlight that came with it. Unlike some of the other captains, Blake didn't care much for the spotlight. He was more reserved and measured. You could tell he knew the water and cared about keeping things professional. At the time, it looked like he had a long future ahead in the fishing world, and possibly on the show as well. But his time on Deadliest Catch was shorter than expected. After just a couple of seasons, Blake left the series. The reasons weren't fully explained on screen, but there were rumors that made it seem like there were differences in how things were run. Some reports suggested he didn't like how the show was being edited or how it portrayed certain situations. Others said he just wanted to step away from the cameras and focus on the work itself. For a while, Blake kept a low profile. He continued fishing, stayed out of the spotlight, and didn't chase more screen time. But in the years that followed, things began to unravel. In early 2018, Blake was arrested for DUI and substance possession in Oregon. It wasn't the first sign that something was wrong, but it was one of the clearest. People who knew him said he had been struggling with substance abuse, and even though he'd once been a strong, capable captain, addiction had slowly taken over. Just a few months later, on May 21, 2018, Blake was found dead in his home in Astoria, Oregon. He was only 38 years old when he passed. Friends hadn't heard from him in a few days, and when police checked in, they discovered he had died. The scene suggested a possible overdose, and later, toxicology reports confirmed the presence of fentanyl and other controlled substances in his system. The news didn't come with big headlines or long tributes on TV or the internet, but for fans who remembered him from the early days, it was a painful loss. Blake wasn't a regular cast member, and he wasn't featured in dramatic storylines, but he was part of the foundation of the show during those first few years. He was one of the real fishermen who knew the job before the cameras showed up. And sadly, he fell to the same enemy that had taken some of his crewmates too. Keith Anderson. Keith Anderson wasn't a cast member, but he was connected to the show, and his story is one of the most heartbreaking. He was the father of Jake Anderson, who was one of the younger deckhands that joined the FV Northwestern and quickly became a fan favorite. Jake's journey was full of ups and downs, and much of it played out on camera, including the disappearance and death of his father. Keith was a retired high school counselor living in Washington State. He was close with his son and supported Jake's decision to go into fishing, even though he knew how dangerous it could be. They talked often, and Jake mentioned more than once that his dad was one of the steady, reliable people in his life. In January 2010, everything changed when Keith left his home to run some errands and never came back. At first, there wasn't much information. His truck was found abandoned a few days later, not far from his house. Inside the vehicle were some of his belongings, but no sign of him and no clear reason why he would have left. Jake was out at sea when it happened. He got the call while filming, and viewers could see how much it affected him. He was clearly torn between staying with the crew or going home to find out what had happened. In the end, he finished the trip, but the uncertainty weighed on him. For years, Keith Anderson remained missing. There were rumors, suspicions, and multiple searches, but nothing solid came up. Jake spoke about it occasionally, mostly when asked, and each time it was clear the pain hadn't gone anywhere. Not knowing what happened to his father stayed with him, season after season. Then, in 2012, 2 years after Keith disappeared, his remains were discovered in a wooded area outside of Seattle. His death was ruled as suspicious, but to this day, no arrests have been made and no cause of death has been publicly confirmed. Jake has said in interviews that losing his father and not knowing what happened for so long changed him. It pushed him deeper into his own struggles with addiction, depression, and anger. He eventually went to rehab and tried to put his life back together, but the pain of losing Keith never fully left. So far, the fate of most of the cast from the show hasn't been encouraging at all. It makes one wonder, how many more names will be added to this list in the years to come? Will the industry ever address what happens after the cameras stop rolling? Or is this just the price of surviving in a world like Deadliest Catch? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.